This is the online lecture slideshow for Philosophy 131, Learning Module 6. Part 2 of 2, the subject is Faith and Reason. Question 3. What reasons are there for not accepting Pascal's wager argument? Recall, Pascal's argument was that you're better off believing than not believing in God, even if God does not exist. Why? Religious belief rewards people in this life by providing emotional and social resources that you don't have if you don't believe. So there are at least 3 problems that skeptics have with Pascal's wager. Believing is not something we can just decide to do. We can try to be like Christians, but faith may never come to us. Pascal proposes a very specific, unforgiving Catholic picture of what God would be like if God exists. If Pascal's view is inaccurate, the rewards and losses change radically. Pascal is really advocating that sometimes we should just believe something without any evidence. Believe in God just because you might be better off, in the end, believing rather than not believing, whether or not God exists. I discuss each of these points separately, but each objection is somewhat related. But first, we need to see what sort of God and hell there is, on Pascal's view, so that we can understand how he calculates the payoffs for belief versus non-belief. It's not enough for us to believe in hell and that non-believers go there. It must really be as Pascal envisions. In the New Testament, in the Gospel according to Mark, chapter 9, Jesus says, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them if a large millstone were hung around their neck and they were thrown into the sea. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than with 2 hands to go into hell where the fire never goes out. And if your foot causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life crippled than to have 2 feet and be thrown into hell. And if your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into hell, where the worms that eat them do not die, and the fire is not quenched." So let's consider the first objection to Pascal's wager. Believing is not something we can decide to do. It isn't subject to the will, so it shouldn't be considered an action we can choose. You can strive to believe and fail. So the infinite reward is really not available to you unless Pascal is wrong about his assessment of the payoffs. More on this when I return to the second objection. Pascal agrees that we can't decide to believe that God exists. He says that if you are convinced by the wager, then you should go live among religious people so that habits of faith can change you into a believer. It is true that you can decide to perform actions that will make it likely that eventually you will become a believer. So this objection really doesn't undermine Pascal's claim to have provided a prudential reason for being or acting like a theist. Still, one risks eternal damnation if one does not believe. Again, you can't just try to believe to get the most rewarding payoff. You must actually believe. Pascal sends a mixed message. Won't I get a reward if I try to believe and fail? No, he says, try not. Do or do not. There is no try. Recall Pascal's wager and his matrix of payoffs. We have to ask ourselves, are these the only outcomes possible? Objection 2. Pascal just presumes a specific picture of what God would be like if God existed. The assumption is that God would send believers to heaven and non-believers to hell. But why should we accept this extra but essential assumption? He doesn't say. He just uses his own notion of God and God's system of rewards and punishments. You must believe in hell and that non-believers go there. God is punishing, not forgiving. But other entrance criteria to heaven are possible. Maybe God rewards poorly or not at all those who believe in him because they want to get to heaven. God might reward people who lead a good life and punish people who are evil, regardless of their theological convictions. Or God might send everyone to heaven, except for those who believe in him on the basis of Pascal's wager. Or blind faith acceptors of religious doctrine who never question their religious leaders might go to hell or purgatory for their failure to use the brains God gave them to sort out coherent interpretations of Scripture versus incoherent interpretations. God might reward skeptics and punish fanatics, or God created the world but could not care less about what happens to living or dead humans. Or there are really many gods, so the payoff matrix changes radically, etc. It looks like this. Different assumptions make for different payoffs. Suppose there's a mean God. If a mean God exists, you have a lot to lose. If a mean God does not exist, there's no great loss. God could reward everybody the same, whether they believed or not. God might understand why people don't believe. The proofs of God maybe aren't very convincing. People use their brains and are skeptical. God understands our non-belief, and so God rewards us similarly. In short, objection 2 is that Pascal's payoff matrix is too simplistic. There are really two forms of this second objection here. One is that Pascal's payoff matrix needs more rows. God might reward or punish degrees of belief or non-belief differently. For instance, God might punish non-tolerant, unforgiving true believers who never consider evidence for or against his existence. He might forgive non-believers who struggle to believe, but found insufficient evidence or only logically flawed arguments. God might reward and not punish critical, skeptical thinkers. The second form of this objection is that Pascal's payoff matrix has too few columns. Other gods are possible. Multiple gods are possible. So other systems of rewards and punishments might ensue. And it might not even depend upon whether one believes or not what happens to you after you die. For all we know, Pascal has the wrong conception of God, or even the wrong God altogether. A mean God, an ironic God, a loving God, a lesser God might make very different judgments, arbitrary judgments, or maybe no judgments. The non-interfering, non-judging creator God of deists might be all that there is after all. The world might not end as Scripture predicts. You have to believe a lot already about God and God's reward scheme for Pascal's payoff matrix to convince you to strive to believe. In the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 13, it says, "This is how we will be at the end of the age. The angels will come and separate the wicked from the righteous and throw them into the fiery furnace, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." This is all we have as evidence for what's supposed to happen to us if we believe or we don't believe, if we are righteous or not. The third objection to Pascal goes like this. Pascal is really advocating that sometimes we should just believe a proposition without any evidence. Believe in God just because you might be better off in the end, whether or not God exists. This attitude motivates much strife among people of faith and non-believers. Faith is often celebrated as a strength, an expression of courage in the face of doubt, disbelief, and adversity. Among many religious people, faith is an antidote to reason, when reason runs contrary to what one believes, or what one wants to believe. The trouble is that this substitutes just believe P for a believe P based on evidence E. A standard of evidence is a more objective and socially useful standard if it requires our accusers and salespeople and doctors to at least provide a preponderance of evidence for a claim before we take it seriously. Faith-based reasoning sidesteps this requirement. Every day, in relationships, contracts, courts of law, and in science, we choose evidence over faith because what is true sometimes matters more than what we want to be true. Here's Calvin talking to his tiger, Hobbes. "Well, I've decided I do believe in Santa Claus, no matter how preposterous it sounds." His tiger friend says, "What convinced you?" "A simple risk analysis," Calvin says. "I want presents, lots of presents. Why risk not getting them over a matter of belief? Heck, I'll believe anything they want." Tiger says, "How cynically enterprising of you." Calvin says, "It's the spirit of Christmas." Question 4. Why does philosopher William Clifford reject believing anything on faith alone? Clifford says it's wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. If a man holding a belief which he was taught in childhood or persuaded of afterwards keeps down and pushes away any doubts which arise about it in his mind, purposely avoids the reading of books in the company of men that call into question or discuss it, and regards as impious those questions which cannot easily be asked without disturbing it. The life of that man is one long sin against mankind. This is William Clifford from his Ethics of Belief in 1877. Clifford makes the point that beliefs have serious consequences. Clifford is an evidentialist, that is, someone who thinks that if you do not have evidence for X, then your belief in X is not rational. A belief is justified only if it is proportioned to the evidence. Why? No belief held by one person, however trivial or obscure it seems, is ever actually insignificant or without its effects on the fate of fellow humans. This is because every belief a person has becomes a ground for action, strengthens some conclusions, weakens others, prepares us to believe other things, and subsequently has a significant effect on our character and how we act. In fact, Clifford argues, it is morally wrong for you to believe something on little or no evidence, since your belief, the grounds for your actions, have consequences for others. Consider the optimistic but neglectful shipowner. He knows his ship is in need of repairs. It is not seaworthy. But he convinces himself that the ship will make it one more journey. He has faith that it will make it. He sends it off without telling the captain or crew or its immigrants about the threat. They all drown in a storm. He is guilty of killing everyone aboard, no matter how earnestly he believed or confident he made himself about its safety. What if the ship and crew had been lucky? If the ship had not sunk, the ship owner would be no less guilty for putting all of those people at risk with his belief. According to Clifford, to believe that the ship is safe when it is not is immoral, period. He says, if the belief has been accepted on insufficient evidence, the pleasure is a stolen one. Not only does it deceive ourselves by giving us a sense of power, which we do not really possess, but it is sinful because it is stolen in defiance of our duty to mankind. Believing on insufficient evidence or in the face of contrary evidence harms yourself and violates your moral duty to the rest of humankind to prevent harm when one can. Who is more worthy of our respect, the person who believes a claim because it serves their interests, or the person who believes because the preponderance of evidence supports their belief? So here's an outline of Clifford's argument against believing on faith alone. To believe on faith means to believe that a claim is true in spite of the fact that evidence is absent or weak, or to believe for faulty reasons. Any case of believing for such reasons has the serious potential to infect and corrupt the system of belief that we all depend on. It promotes deception, believing what's false. It fosters gullibility in ourselves and others. It undermines the social fabric of knowledge based on evidence and trust that we all revere and endeavor to speak truth, upon which self and other respecting people in civil societies depend. It enables frauds, cheats, liars, and malicious people to take advantage of the credulous, those willing to believe. When these effects are tolerated or encouraged, we shirk our duty to ourselves and others to believe only what is supported by sufficient evidence. Shirking our duty, any duty to ourselves and others, is morally wrong. Thus, it's wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything upon insufficient evidence. This is often referred to as Clifford's Rule. So, belief is not just a private matter. Beliefs have serious consequences for others too. But how extensive is one's obligation to seek truth? Even if someone's belief is so fixed that they are incapable of thinking that they are wrong, that person still has a choice about which action to take regarding it. One does not escape the responsibility of investigating it, talking to others, checking oneself against evidence. No one, however unimportant, is exempt from this requirement. Every bit of gossip, slander, malice, untruth uttered by one person has an effect on the rest of us. When you disparage evidence-seeking, you promote lies, rumor, unsubstantiated opinion, superstition, ignorance, and encourage strife. Permitting the spread of falsehoods, even if it's just you and someone else bullshitting, undermines the social fabric of trust, credibility, and respect. So let me summarize Clifford's evidentialism. People, such as the deluded shipowner, have an enormous capacity for self-deception. Optimistic people who want to believe something too often believe what is incredible. These are well-documented psychological problems. Many people are credulous, gullible. That is, they are willing to believe something on slight or no evidence, perhaps because it makes them happy, or they simply trust the alleged authority of others. But some beliefs are credible and some are not. We owe it to ourselves and others to seek evidence, distrust hearsay or speculation, question faith. For any belief, think it possible that you might be wrong. We may believe the statement of another person when there are reasonable grounds for supposing that they probably have evidence rather than merely wishful thinking. But this is no guarantee. We should still seek evidence ourselves. Clifford says, it's wrong in all cases to believe on insufficient evidence. And where we value truth and advocate investigation, it is worse to just believe. Can you think of any exceptions? Evidentialists want to apply the same standards of evidence that we use in journalism, or law, or medicine and science, to religious claims also. Here are some proof standards, such as those from science and those used for conviction in civil and criminal courts of law. Each requires that strong supporting evidence be given for any accusation or hypothesis. There's the preponderance of evidence standard. This is the attitude where you accept a hypothesis if, given all of the evidence, it seems more likely to be true than not true. This is also called the balance of probabilities. This is the most basic level one must satisfy. The next level is the clear and convincing evidence standard. Somebody who makes a claim must convince the triers of fact, the people that are testing the facts, judges, jurors, scientists, peers, that it is substantially more likely than not that the hypothesis is in fact true. Substantially more likely. The next standard of evidence, for instance, this is the standard of evidence, the threshold of evidence needed in criminal cases. The reasonable doubt standard says that we accept a hypothesis from among its rivals which is unreasonable to doubt, given all evidence available. The next highest standard, probably the highest standard there is, this would be the philosopher's standard, beyond the shadow of a doubt. That is, accept only what is impossible to doubt. This is the most strict level one must satisfy. All we're asking here is that people submit to the most basic standard of evidence, namely that, given all of the evidence, the hypothesis on offer is more likely to be true than not true. This is the preponderance of evidence standard. Question 5. Why do scientists such as Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris reject faith-based religious belief? Some people are immoderate or even faith-hostile evidentialists. Why? Some people are immoderate or faith-hostile evidentialists. Why? We discuss here two of the arguments, one from each, of Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris about how religion, or faith-based thinking, harms more than it helps society. They are polarizing figures. I advise reading what they say first, before you accept what other people say about them. Each thinks that whatever religion offers can be got by other less dangerous, more useful means, for instance, by doing science or philosophy. Read these two online articles before proceeding. Richard Dawkins' Science versus Religion. This article is in the course text. And also Sam Harris's Atheist Manifesto. There's a link to this online via the syllabus and in SACS-ET. Here is how religion harms society, according to these people. Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, and many others make the unpopular case that religion or faith is detrimental to reason, science, and even civilized society. Why? Here are 6 reasons. It promotes irrational beliefs based on untestable claims. It promotes societal dysfunction. It promotes social divisiveness. It inspires, justifies, rewards sectarian violence. It encourages people to believe claims made by authoritative and often corrupt figures. It encourages people to accept unsubstantiated claims on the basis of no evidence, and sometimes despite evidence. Richard Dawkins makes the point at the outset that science is not a religion. He says faith, being belief that isn't based on evidence, is the principal vice of any religion, and who, looking at Northern Ireland or the Middle East, can be confident that the brain virus of faith is not exceedingly dangerous. One of the stories told to young Muslim suicide bombers is that martyrdom is the quickest way to heaven, and not just heaven, but a special part of heaven, where they will receive their special reward of 72 virgin brides. Given the dangers of faith and considering the accomplishments of reason and observation in the activity called science, there always seems to be someone who comes forward and says, "Of course, your science is just a religion like ours." Fundamentally, science just comes down to faith, doesn't it? Well, science is not a religion, and it doesn't just come down to faith. Although it has many of religion's virtues, it has none of its vices. Science is based upon verifiable evidence. Religious faith not only lacks evidence, its independence from evidence is its pride and joy, shouted from the rooftops. Why else would Christians wax critical of doubting Thomas? The other apostles are held up to us as exemplars of virtue because faith was enough for them. Doubting Thomas, on the other hand, required evidence. Perhaps he should be the patron saint of scientists. This is Richard Dawkins in his 1996 Science versus Religion article. Science requires reasons and observations. I need to say more about what Dawkins and others mean when they require that scientific claims be verifiable, at least in ways that religious claims are not. By verifiable, he means testable by observation, under conditions where we control for bias and error. According to evidentialists, all claims need to be supported by reason, which, they maintain, requires the use of evidence, observations, logic. Dawkins is this sort of evidentialist. Dawkins thinks that science, as a process of acquiring knowledge, or at least some justified beliefs about the world, is superior to faith-based reasoning, or any reasoning where evidence is not required. Scientific claims need to be testable. There are two kinds of testability in science. Each requires that observations support or confirm claims, or that any such claims can be disproved or disconfirmed by observations. If a claim is testable, then it is either verifiable by experience, that is, corroborated by independent, public, controlled observations, or it's falsifiable by experience, which means it's vulnerable to disproof by observations. Here's Dawkins' argument in outline form, why religious claims are unacceptable. Only scientific claims are acceptable, worth considering seriously. Scientific claims are essentially testable. Religious claims are not. If a claim is testable, then it's either verifiable by experience or falsifiable by experience. But religious claims, being predominantly no evidence required, are not testable. That is, they are not verifiable and they are not falsifiable. One need only believe these on faith. Therefore, religious claims are not acceptable. Corollary: any claim that is testable, religious or otherwise, is acceptance worthy. So, some religious claims are testable and hence scientific, perhaps, but the point is that people just believe them on faith alone, which is unjustified and defies the conventions of evidence. I want to be clearer on the notion of an unfalsifiable claim. An unfalsifiable claim is going to be a claim which is not subject to disproof, which, no matter what, can't be disproven by observation. We should be suspect of such claims. If we don't have a good reason to doubt it, to reject it, because it's not ever possible to reject it, then we don't have a good reason to believe it. We should not accept a claim if there's no way we could see or realize when we're wrong about it. Any claim, such as a description or a prediction or an explanation, needs to have a way we can check it. There needs to be a way we would see when we're wrong. If there is never a way to see we are wrong, if there's never a way to test a claim, we don't have a good reason to believe it. This doesn't mean the claim is false, but not having evidence for the claim is a pretty good reason not to believe it, at least until one has some sort of evidence. A description is unfalsifiable when there is no conceivable experience which could disprove it. There is no experience which would show you, one way or the other, whether it's false. For instance, you can't disprove these claims. Bigfoot exists. What observations? What could we see that would convince us someone's wrong when they say Bigfoot exists? Suppose someone says every evil serves a greater good. Well, how could we show that that's not true? It isn't automatically true. The problem, of course, is that we're not able to even show what would count as evidence against it. A prediction is unfalsifiable when it is so broad or so ambiguous that what's claimed occurs no matter what happens. For instance, just try and disprove these claims. Bigfoot will continue to be seen in the Sierra. Anyone can say that. Nothing, no observation could show us that that's not true. If we don't see Bigfoot for a while, well, so it's still true. We could continue to see Bigfoot in the Sierra because we don't know everything that's going to happen in the future. God answers prayers. Well, suppose God doesn't answer prayers. Would any observation show us that we're wrong when we say God answers prayers? An explanation is unfalsifiable when it's consistent with any or every observation one makes. How, for instance, could one disprove either of these theories? Bigfoot eludes us. We can't see a Bigfoot or catch a Bigfoot because it's an undiscovered kind of forest ape that is smart. It hides and wants to avoid capture. Every observation supports that view. No observation could show that it's wrong. But suppose there is no Bigfoot. Here's another one. Her cancer disappeared because she visited the Holy Shrine of Lourdes and was cured by the Virgin Mary. Could any observation show us we're wrong if we are wrong about this? Perhaps she spontaneously healed. Perhaps the chemotherapy worked. No matter what, no observation, no set of observations could show us we were mistaken about the Virgin Mary curing her cancer theory. Let's return to Dawkins' argument for why religious claims are unacceptable. There are some problems. His first assumption, premise 1, assumes what it needs to prove, or it is itself untestable. To be fair to Dawkins, his argument does not need to presume that only scientific claims are testable. He believes this. But other sorts of claims could be testable too. But he wants for us to use empirical observations to check claims, all claims, no exceptions. Faith-based reasoning dismisses this requirement. His second assumption, premise 2, is dubious. Some scientific claims are also untestable. Some of these are fundamental assumptions. For example, that there exists a physical world, a cosmos outside of human minds and language, or whatever exists is measurable, observable, at least conceivably, or science offers a superior guide to reality, etc. Also, many claims are not yet testable. But when technology and observation enables us to check them, we should. But yes, science relies upon a few claims that cannot be tested. His point is that we need tests to sort the true from the false. Faith-based reasoning does not require this. Another problem. Premise 3 is an excellent practical criterion for which beliefs to accept and which to reject. But what about beliefs not amenable to testing? This doesn't license faith-based belief, but it does undermine the primacy of science. See that second problem again. Also, don't literature and poetry and art also reveal truths? Another problem. Premise 4 is false or ambiguous. Of course, some religious claims are true, some are testable. For instance, claims about someone actually resurrecting and not merely being resuscitated can be tested by observations. Claims about virgin women conceiving children can be tested. Of course, legendary religious claims cannot be tested, since we cannot cross-examine witnesses or assess circumstantial evidence. But few allegedly historical claims can be tested to the satisfaction of scientists like Dawkins and Harris for the same reasons. Claims about miracles, healings, etc., witnessed under controlled circumstances, are also amenable to test, conceivably. Neuroscientist Sam Harris believes that faith is dangerous. Here is what he says in his book, The End of Faith. The men who committed the atrocities of September 11 were certainly not cowards, as they were repeatedly described in the Western media, nor were they lunatics in any ordinary sense. They were men of faith, perfect faith, as it turns out, and this, it must finally be acknowledged, is a terrible thing to be. Harris thinks religion inspires violence. He says, in a world riven by ignorance, only the atheist refuses to deny the obvious. Religious faith promotes human violence to an astonishing degree. Religion inspires violence in at least two senses. Number one, people often kill other human beings because they believe that the creator of the universe wants them to do it. The inevitable psychopathic corollary being that the act will ensure them an eternity of happiness after death. Examples of this sort of behavior are practically innumerable, jihadist suicide bombing being the most prominent. Number two, larger numbers of people are inclined toward religious conflict simply because their religion constitutes the core of their moral identities. One of the enduring pathologies of human culture is the tendency to raise children to fear and demonize other human beings on the basis of religion. Many religious conflicts that seem driven by terrestrial concerns, therefore, are religious in origin. This is Sam Harris from his Atheist Manifesto in 2005. So why is religion such a potent source of human violence? Here is Harris again. Our religions are intrinsically incompatible with one another. Either Jesus rose from the dead and will be returning to earth like a superhero or not. Either the Quran is the infallible word of God or it isn't. Every religion makes explicit claims about the way the world is, and the sheer profusion of these incompatible claims creates an enduring basis for conflict. There is no other sphere of discourse in which human beings so fully articulate their differences from one another, or cast these differences in terms of everlasting rewards and punishments. Religion is the one endeavor in which us-them thinking achieves a transcendent significance. If a person really believes that calling God by the right name can spell the difference between eternal happiness and eternal suffering, then it becomes quite reasonable to treat heretics and unbelievers rather badly. Religious faith is a conversation stopper. Religion is the only area of our discourse in which people are systematically protected from the demand to give evidence in defense of their strongly held beliefs. This is Sam Harris from his Atheist Manifesto again. So, Harris thinks that reason is better than faith. When we have reasons for what we believe, we have no need of faith. When we have no reasons, or bad reasons, we have lost our connection to the world and to one another. Atheism is nothing more than a commitment to the most basic standard of intellectual honesty. One's convictions should be proportional to one's evidence. Pretending to be certain when one isn't, indeed pretending to be certain about propositions for which no evidence is even conceivable, is both an intellectual and a moral failing. Only the atheist has realized this. The atheist is simply a person who has perceived the lies of religion and refused to make them his own. So Harris makes a pretty strong argument. He's not a moderate about this. Here is his anti-moderation argument against religious belief in God. This is an outline. Believing anything on faith-based thinking alone is irrational. That is, one should not believe with absolute confidence any claim for which there is not adequate evidence subject to logical or empirical test. Religion is a powerful social institution based primarily upon faith-based thinking. But many religious beliefs are obsolete, demonstrably false, or mutually exclusive. Religion fosters ignorance, fear, hatred, and strife. Other things do too, and maybe other things do it worse, but religion is one of the main elements of society that do this. Religion supports antisocial behavior among people. So do other things, but focus here on religion's role in bad behavior. For instance, religion encourages intolerance of people with different interpretations of Scripture. Heretics, renouncers or apostates, and non-believers, infidels. Religion inspires and rewards persecutions, sectarian violence, holy war, fanaticism, genocides, crusades, jihad. Technology, guns and bombs, makes it so that religious differences are dangerous. This is not religion's fault, but religion magnifies its effect. Religion promotes the unhealthy behavior of many people. It is not the only causal factor, sure, but can we say it has no significant influence? For instance, religion discourages the use of medical interventions, birth control measures, and abortion. Don't use condoms, it is sinful. Practice abstinence only. Religion deprives women of control over their fertility and keeps them subordinate, pregnant, at higher risk of contracting AIDS. 1/3 of the young pregnant women in Botswana are HIV positive. Harris goes on, civil society tolerates and does not criticize people's faith. This provides cover for a social institution that enshrines irrational, antisocial, and unhealthy behavior. Society erodes if we continue to ignore or refuse to critique religious views that inspire or sanction bad behavior. When irrational, antisocial, unhealthy beliefs or practices are more harmful than beneficial, any powerful social institution that teaches them should not be tolerated by civil society. Therefore, tolerance of faith-based religion is more harmful than beneficial. It is not good to believe in God if it leads to serious social harms, as it does given religious faith and practice. We can live reasonable, full, purpose-driven, meaningful lives worthy of compassion and respect without believing in God. Therefore, it's not right or good to believe in God via religious faith. This is the end of Learning Module 6, Slideshow Part 2 of 2.